News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up in the news this hour, the Cobra Emergency Committee meets to plan for what may be one of the worst storms to hit Britain in years. Storm Eunice due to make landfall in the next few hours. We'll tell you what's been closing and what is scheduled to close. It's looking like a bad one. Also, as the British family of a man killed by a great white shark mourn his death in the waters off Sydney, a zoologist explains why and how one of our few natural predators decides to strike. And how odd is Belgium? Is their decision to adopt a 4-day working week an outlier or the beginning of a Europe-wide trend? Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, the broadcaster Tonya Buxton to go through the stories with you. But first, we have the headlines today.
Very good afternoon to you. I'm Polly Middlehurst with the very latest news headlines for you here on GB News. A rare and red weather warning has been issued for the south of Wales and southwest England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to hit the UK tonight. The Met Office says there's a danger to life from flying debris. Damage to homes, further travel disruption and power cuts are all expected. Thousands of homes in parts of northern England and Scotland are still without power after Storm Dudley hit last night. GB News North East reporter Rachel Sweeney has spoken to one woman in Concert whose home has been damaged by Storm Arwen, Malik and now Dudley.
It was 9 days off with the electricity. Just had to do without that for 9 days. And then the second storm pulled some roofs, the roof tiles off, which hasn't been fixed, and I think that's what's caused this. The winds just come through like a raw thunder and just come through there and blew the front out. So
how did you feel when you heard it?
We didn't know what to do, sort of shocked, just ran outside and then we just saw the hole.
Maria Sudd speaking there. Well, meteorologist Alex Deakin told GB News that there is a real risk to life in the red warning area when Storm Eunice hits the UK tonight and tomorrow.
Red warnings are rare. We don't issue them on a whim. We only issue a red warning when we're seriously concerned and there's a threat to life. So red warnings, 1 or 2 a year at most. This is a serious situation. It is potentially very dangerous in that red warning area across parts of South Wales and southwest England.
Alex Deakin, we'll have more coverage of Storm Eunice here on GB News throughout the rest of today. But on to other news. And Boris Johnson says the attack on a kindergarten in Ukraine was in fact a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians. And he fears it's a thing we'll see more of over the next few days. It comes after Ukraine's foreign minister claimed a Ukrainian village in the Luhansk region had been shelled by Russian-backed separatists from the occupied territory of Donbass. Speaking on a visit to RAF Waddington in Lincolnshire, the Prime Minister said the picture in Ukraine continues to be grim.
Today, as I'm sure you've already picked up, a kindergarten was shelled in what we're taking to be what we know was a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians, designed to create a pretext, a spurious provocation for Russian action. We fear very much that is the kind of thing we'll see more of over the next few days.
Boris Johnson speaking earlier. Well, at a news conference in Kiev, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said Russia needs to follow the path of diplomacy or face tough economic sanctions from Britain and its allies.
Despite their claims, Russia's military build-up shows no signs of slowing. There is currently no evidence that their forces are withdrawing, and we need Russia to step back from the brink.
Liz Truss speaking earlier. Well, in other news today, the Home Secretary has stopped the practice of offering so-called golden visas to wealthy foreign investors amid security concerns. The Tier 1 investor visa route has been shut now to all new applicants from all nationalities with immediate effect. Priti Patel says the move will help to stop corrupt elites who threaten national security. It follows concerns that some applicants acquired their wealth illegitimately and were associated with wider corruption. Here, 3 police officers have been charged with sending grossly offensive WhatsApp messages to Wayne Couzens. The 2 serving and 1 former Met police officer reportedly shared racist and misogynist messages while working with Sarah Everard's killer between April and August in 2019. They're set to appear at Magistrates Court in Westminster next month. Police Scotland will be the first force in the UK to issue all of its officers with an anti-overdose spray. All operational officers will now be equipped with Naxalone kits and trained in their use as well. The spray counters the effects of drugs like heroin and can save the lives of people who may be overdosing. In the 6-month pilot period, Police Scotland saved over 60 lives with it. And finally, some good news for Team GB from the Beijing Winter Olympics. We're guaranteed our first medal of the Games after our men's curlers beat USA to reach the final. What's more, Great Britain's women could join them as well. They secured 2nd place in the semi-finals with another thrilling win earlier on today, thanks to Eve Muirhead fashioning a great escape. They play Sweden tomorrow in the Final 4. The men's curlers face Sweden in the final day on Saturday. Congratulations to them. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now more from Brazier.
Well, first up, let's just focus, if we can, on the impending damage. And I think it's realistic to talk about damage that will happen as a consequence of Storm Eunice. The Met Office, they've issued a red weather warning for strong winds, scheduled to be at their worst from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning through till 12 noon, though actually really from 5 a.m. through till 9 p.m. The worst of it, though, concentrated in those morning hours. Cobra currently meeting about this. Michael Ellis, the Cabinet Office Minister, is chairing that meeting. There's talk of the Army getting called in to some degree. That would be, I suppose, a prudent contingency measure at this stage. If this storm is going to be as bad as some people are suggesting, and the suggestion is it could be, we've heard these things before, and one of the worst storms in decades. Potentially. Let's just show you some pictures of what has been happening. Well, this was yesterday. This was Storm Dudley, so 2 winter storms in 3 days. Storm Dudley has led to 14,000 homes being left without power in the north. If you are listening on DAB radio, it's, as you would expect, the usual storm scenes that result in flying debris, certainly worse, the flooding in coastal areas as well. It doesn't really work on radio, does it, this story? But you'll get the picture. And if you are travelling tomorrow or planning to travel tomorrow, bear in mind the fact that all the trains in cancelled. Every single train, every single scheduled service in Wales cancelled tomorrow, so that the 1,000 miles of track in the Principality can be checked for fallen trees and other problems on the tracks. A picture that I saw early before coming in from Cardiff, the main station in Cardiff Central, with a trampoline that was jammed in front of the main engine, stopping that train from leaving. A fairly typical problem, that. So this is looking, in the context of these things, pretty serious. We're talking to a weather presenter shortly about this, but the advice, certainly from the Met Office, is at the moment, avoid travelling, stay indoors as much as possible. That's a severe warning, isn't it? And some of the closures we're hearing about, Legoland in Windsor, Kew Gardens. So this is all the way through up to the London area. London Eye closed tomorrow as well, at least for part of the day. So we'll be reflecting how that story is emerging throughout the course of the next couple of hours, and whether there is a line emerging too from that COBRA Emergency Committee meeting as well. But in the meantime, we'll start with our main story today. And it starts with a question. If you voted Brexit, you didn't know what you were doing. That's one of the conclusions drawn by the European Parliament in a report on Article 50. If you remember, that was the process by which a country leaves the EU. There was a time a few years ago when we talked about little else. MEPs say the EU made lots of mistakes which allowed the UK to trigger Article 50. One was that parties in favour of Remain weren't given enough support, which in turn meant Britons weren't fully appraised of the benefits of ongoing membership. MEPs agreed that if any other EU country has a referendum and decides to leave, there must be an automatic confirmatory vote. Their report, which was passed by more than 500 MEP votes, said British citizens had scant knowledge about the European Union and were not adequately informed about the far-reaching consequences of the decision to leave the Union. We'll discuss that with Tanya Buxton shortly. But in the meantime, let's go to the former Brexit Party MEP, Ben Habib, who joins me now to ponder on this one. Ben, welcome to you. These MEPs, they're not representative necessarily of how the European Commission thinks, even less the individual nations that make up the European Union, but they speak to something, a resolve not to let anybody leave this union if it can possibly be avoided.
Well, absolutely right. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, Colin. You know, ever since a referendum was called in the United Kingdom, the EU has worked tirelessly, first to frustrate the people voting in favour, and then to frustrate the actual result of the referendum. And then they've waged a low-level, not so low-level, trade war against the United Kingdom. And when all that sort of didn't work, they've tried to get their hooks into the United Kingdom through various measures in the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, not least of which you know, something you and I have discussed before, is the Northern Ireland Protocol, effectively leaving part of the United Kingdom still in the European Union. So, you know, when 500 MEPs patronisingly conclude that the British people didn't know what they were voting for, actually what they're reflecting is the imperial intent that the EU has and the antipathy it has for member states who exercise in any sort of independent thought. That's what you're seeing playing out in the European Parliament, not what the British people thought or didn't think at the time, or what they knew and didn't know at the time.
It feels almost like an act of nostalgia, Ben Habib, talking about Article 50. As I said in my introduction, there was a time we talked about little else. William Hague, the former Conservative Party leader, former Foreign Secretary, once talked about the European Union being a burning building with no exits. And then we got Article 50. So there are the means there for other countries who maybe want to leave the club, but it's not going to be made easy for them.
No, it isn't. And I mean, you say that it's almost nostalgic talking about Article 50. Funny enough, Article 50 still preoccupies me to some extent because, as you might know, Colin, I'm fighting this legal battle to have the Northern Ireland Protocol reviewed by the courts in this country. Ultimately, I suspect we'll end up in the Supreme Court. But one of the grounds of action we've got is that Article 50 clearly states that a country is allowed to leave the European Union pursuant to its own constitutional requirements. It says a country. It doesn't say part of a country. And you might also recall, Colin, that at the time that the whole Article 50 debate was going on, the EU refused to discuss any form of ongoing arrangements. It was the withdrawal agreement first, and then the trade and ongoing arrangements later. And actually, it breached both aspects of the Article 50 process. First, by insisting that the entire country couldn't leave, and they've hung on to Northern Ireland. And secondly, by giving effect to a long-term arrangement for the constitutional settlement in Northern Ireland. There's no basis for that in the Article 50 process. So actually, whilst the public may have moved on from Article 50, those of us who are still fighting the Brexit battles in order to get the United Kingdom properly out of the EU, it's still an issue for us.
Ben Habib, for now, we'll say thanks very much indeed, because I want to get through some of our viewer responses on this one. There's a strong reaction to this story, as you might imagine, on Twitter. I'll take you through the poll results shortly. Ben Habib, thanks very much indeed for your contribution today, joining us there from Warsaw. Typical is this from Michael, who says, in relation to the idea that the MEPs would like to see a confirmatory referendum should any country in the future want to leave the European Union. So, says Michael, that they can do what they did in Ireland and have a second one when they don't gain the intended result. Tonya Buxton is alongside me here in the studio for the next couple of hours. Article 50, it has almost a slightly nostalgic ring. The trench warfare, the parliamentary trench warfare of Brexit.
It really does. And they only want another referendum because they didn't get what they wanted. And the reason that the British public decided to leave Europe is because of exactly the way they're speaking to us and treating us now. Like we're fools. Like I didn't vote. Don't tell anyone. I was too confused. I read both sides. I was too confused. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to sit on the fence on this one because I really don't know. But if I was going to vote again now, it would be to exit Europe, absolutely, because I've seen the disgusting manner in which they behave with us. They have no respect for our opinions as people, as British people. And anybody who did vote to leave has been called ignorant and racist and stupid, and they're continuing with this type of language.
Do you feel ever slightly conflicted as as somebody with Greek Cypriot heritage? And you, I suppose on the one hand, you can say, well, look what the European Union did to Greece, and that leaves you with perhaps one perspective, doesn't it?
Exactly, and never forgetting that the Cypriots were the only country in the world where they had the European Union went in and took people's money out of their bank accounts. Don't forget that.
Forget this, what happened in Cyprus.
It was just brushed under. The media didn't bother with that. But, we know people who had all their savings taken, bar £150,000, people who'd sold up everything and put it into their bank accounts, gone to retire in Cyprus and lost everything.
Wow. Tonya, more from you throughout the course of the next 2 hours or so. Now, hundreds of Welsh teenagers have been given £1,600 a month for 2 years with no strings attached. The move has been condemned by opposition politicians who claim it's a waste of money. It will go to every 18-year-old leaving the care system. It is the highest amount offered by a so-called basic income scheme anywhere in the world. Well, joining me now, Nick Buckley, who's spent his life working with young people, many of whom have been through the care system and have spent lots of time with people who have had a tough start to life, really, Nick. That goes without saying. But should we be giving them an income for a couple of years for which there are no strings attached, there are no conditions, they're just given the money?
For me, I would say no, for several reasons. First of all, this is a really, really touchy subject. People in the UK care system don't get the best care and don't have the best system. We need to do more for them. Giving them £1,600 a month for 2 years when they leave care, is that the answer? I don't think it is. I think it's just the latest socialist argument to say, instead of spending people's money, let's do something better. Let's just start giving people's money away. How is it going to improve their lives? After 2 years, it's all gone. Have they developed any new skills? Have they got a job? Have they improved their lives? And if the answer is no, then we've just delayed their failure again.
I mean, the argument against it, Nick, you've articulated it, it creates a dependency culture. In your experience of seeing this on the ground, working with homeless people in particular, in and around Manchester, what works best? What turns a life that's had a really bad start, what turns those lives around?
Let me answer that in two points. The first point is we don't do enough prevention and early intervention. It's okay working with 18-year-olds when they leave the care system, but what did we do to try to keep them with their parents and improve those parenting skills to begin with? That's one point. And then to get back to your question, once you're in the care system and once your life isn't the way it should be, the best way to turn those people around is developing skills and personal responsibility. Because if you're that young person and you're waiting for the care system, for the government, for the Welsh Assembly to improve your life, I'll tell you now, you'll be waiting a long time. What we need to be doing with these young people is building resilience, giving them skills, teaching them about finance, all those things parents should be doing. And in many cases, parents don't do any of this anyway to lots of young people we work with, but they're the skills they need so they can get a job, so they can improve their own lives. That's the only way we break this.
Nick Buckley, as ever, really appreciate your time and your expertise and your knowledge of this field. Thanks very much indeed. Tonya Buxton alongside me to reflect on this one. I'm not a great fan of The Guardian newspaper, Tonya. That will be a surprise to nobody. They had an interesting story, however, this week about a care home, a children's home in Lancashire. There was one kid who'd gone ages without a change of clothes.
Yep, anytime. Thank you.
There are some conditions in which, and some starts that young people in this country get, which are lamentable still. £1,600 a month, it's not too much to offer them, is it really?
It's not going to help, though. So I don't know if you know, but I was a primary school teacher in Tottenham. So I was there for 8 years, and I saw sometimes the children of children who had been in care. And what I do realise is that they need support, they need help, they need to be given skills, they need to be told about their own self-worth and that they are capable of doing more. And that doesn't happen, unfortunately, in the care system. And that's where the money should go. Where is the incentive to do anything if you're just going to get paid to stay at home? I can't see how it's going to help. I do think that we don't look after children, young adults, when they're kind of spat out of the care system. You can't just let go of them. Somebody has to be there to hold their hand and to take them through learning new skills and doing things. But just throwing money at them, that's not the way to do it.
Tonya, while you're here, around about this time yesterday, we heard that the government was planning on introducing or offering jabs in England to kids from 5 years and up. I can see you drawing yourself up to your full height there. You're not entirely chuffed about it.
It actually, I struggle to be calm and to speak about this in a calm manner, because it's so sinister and it's so very, very wrong. These children do not need this vaccine. They do not need it. COVID does not harm them. Omicron is nature's vaccine. It's been great. This vaccine should be given to people who are vulnerable and who need it. And the fact that they're spending money, so this is it, isn't it? Why are they spending all this money? How much is it going to cost?
My money, your money.
My money, your money. How much is it going to cost to give a medication to a child that does not need it and could cause harm? Because we know the JCVI, initially didn't recommend it for children between 11 and 17. So what on earth is going on to give it to children? I want somebody to come and explain this to me, because it seems so fundamentally wrong and it feels very sinister. So if they've got lots of money to put into this kind of medication, put it into looking after children in care.
It's important to stress there is no element of compulsion here. As somebody who's been jabbed and been boosted, my beef is with the element of compulsion in all.
I agree with you, but the government spent £320 million frightening the public. They bought up all the newspapers. We know that the Nudge team from Laura Dodsworth's book, State of Fear, was actually brought in to coerce people to stay home, do as they were told. And this fear has got into people's souls. They're so frightened. Parents are so frightened now to do the right thing for their children. And so when your government is telling you you should maybe do it, then maybe you do it. And so that's where I'm very worried that it has a sinister movement to it, because we have been frightened to death almost.
Tonya, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, will Prince Andrew's £12 million settlement with his accuser, what does it mean? Where's the money coming from? But first, a look at the really very important weather today.
Hello. The Met Office have issued a rare red warning because Storm Eunice arrives overnight and brings the risk of dangerous winds in places, especially parts of South Wales and southwest England. Ahead of Eunice, relatively calm this evening with clearing skies, showers easing and the winds dropping away for some time. So if you're heading to bed thinking it's quite calm out there, well, unfortunately, the winds really ramp up by around midnight or shortly after. Bands of rain sweep through very quickly, turning to snow over northern hills, and the winds continue to increase from the southwest during the early hours of Friday as Storm Eunice arrives. Now, this is a storm that's developed out of nowhere during the last 24 hours and will continue deepening as it approaches southwestern parts of the UK, with the strongest core of winds on the southern flank of Eunice and bumping into cold air, the risk of significant snowfall over northern hills, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. In the amber warning area, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. In the red warning area, risk of 90 mile per hour wind gusts. And as a result, a red warning has been issued. A danger to life for Bristol Channel Coast, South Wales, North Somerset, North Devon, North Cornwall. Those winds peaking during the morning on Friday. Risk of flying debris from damaged structures and risk of widespread disruption across the southern half of the UK from those wind speeds, disruption to power, travel, as well as services. Across northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, some heavy rain at lower levels, some snow mixed in with that rain, but significant snow falling over the hills, 20 centimetres over some higher parts of northern England and southern Scotland, accompanied by strong winds, risk of blizzards and drifting of that snowfall. Later Friday, the winds finally start to relent, but the weekend stays wet and windy. Further gales expected at times, particularly in the far south on Saturday and northern areas on Sunday.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Storm Eunice looks like being a bad one. 100 miles per hour winds. It's going to affect the southwest of England and Wales, especially. The West of England Metro Mayor is called Dan Norris. Dan Norris has encouraged residents to exercise extreme caution and take all possible precautions. He says, I'm urging all local people to act sensibly and take all reasonable precautions. With the approach of Storm Eunice, people should stay indoors if possible and only take journeys if they are really necessary. Don't risk your safety, and please play your part in keeping the pressure off our amazing emergency services. In Somerset, schools, colleges and other council services will be closed. As usual, that calibration between warning people, scaring people, it's your judgment ultimately, but the official advice does seem to be to keep as low a profile as possible tomorrow during Storm Eunice, at least in parts of southwest England and Wales. Well, you're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. We'll start with this story. And it's, in fact, there's some more lines coming through I'm reading on the storm. All trains cancelled in Wales tomorrow. Drivers urged to be careful. Numerous things closed, including Legoland and the London Eye. Let's talk about Prince Andrew. We spent, the best part of 2 hours a couple of nights ago talking about that out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew. Let's turn to the royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Hadel-Manku to reflect on some aspects of this, particularly the financial ones. Rafe, welcome to you. I think you can join us now. Actually, hey, hi, Rafe. Welcome to you. I was talking in our morning editorial meeting this morning. Let me just turn off the voices in my ear, which are becoming a fraction annoying. The financial aspect to this, Rafe, £12 million settlement. Where's the money going to come from? You've had a couple of MPs saying, well, it mustn't come from the public purse. We all nod and say amen to that, of course. 10 years ago, what was the civil list became the sovereign grant, didn't it? So you know far better than most, but as I understand it, this doesn't affect the taxpayer anymore. This comes from the Crown estate. Explain what that is.
That's right. So, well, how long have you got? I'll try and put it into its most basic form, because royal finances are quite complicated. You've got public finances, what used to be called the public purse, and then private finances, what is still called the privy purse. And it's from the privy purse that we're almost guaranteed to see that the funds come to contribute towards Prince Andrew's settlement. The public funds, as you say, used to be called the civil list. Essentially, in the olden days, the monarch had to pay all the expenses of the government, pay the civil service, pay the defence, and the funds for that used to come from the King or Queen's Crown estate. These were vast holdings in London and across the country, along the foreshore of the country as well. And the revenue from that every year would go to the Exchequer to fund things. King George III decided that it was getting too expensive to run the country, and so he voluntarily gave the revenue from the Crown estate, from his public properties, to the government, to Parliament, in exchange for the civil list. In 2012, that was changed. So now the sovereign receives what's called a sovereign grant. And the sovereign grant really is pegged to between 15% and 25% of that Crown estate. So the Crown estate every year generates around £300 million. That goes to the Treasury, and in exchange for that 300 million, the Crown gets back between 50 and 80 million pounds, depending on how much refurbishment is needed. 50 million goes for the running of the household, the operations of the Queen, official travel, maintaining the properties, and currently around 30 million pounds goes for the major refurbishments of Buckingham Palace, which would need to happen anyway. Even if we didn't have a monarchy, we'd have to look after our historic buildings. So that's the sovereign grant. So really, the taxpayer doesn't pay a single penny, because the Crown is getting back 15% of the revenue that it generates every year.
Rafe, do you think the institution of monarchy have been clear enough about this? Have they set about explaining that change a decade ago to the British public clearly enough? And in particular, this idea of the Crown estate, which you so eloquently just explained to us there, is their property. It includes things like the lion's share of Regent Street in central London, for instance, that they handed that over to the state. And actually, I say handed it over, it's their money. And they now derive an income from that, which means they don't tap us taxpayers for cash.
That's right. I should say it's important to know that it's not the private property of the monarch. It's kept by the Crown as a legal entity, so it's called a corporate sole. So the Queen doesn't have any direct control. It's run like a perfectly normal business. It's got its own chairman and its own board and so forth. And none of the capital can be sold off by the sovereign. But yes, it's them. Every sovereign, when they come to the throne, they agree to surrender their rights for the revenue in exchange for, historically, the civil list and now the sovereign grant. This was all done by Sir Michael Peat, who was the Queen's master financier at Buckingham Palace, and was precisely created to avoid the problem of Parliament having to decide how much money to give to the sovereign. This was always seen to be a very politically contentious issue. We know it's the same thing when it comes to MP salaries. No one wants to say that they deserve a pay rise. So by pegging it to a percentage of the Crown estate, which was done in a decade ago, 2012, I think it's really been able to give the monarchy a much surer footing of guaranteed income, but also avoid those awkward conversations. If you wanted to put it, though, in taxpayer terms, it only works out to about £1.69 or so per person, which is, that's less than a cup of coffee at McDonald's.
Preparedness, Manku, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Coming up next, our debate today, teeth in please. I'm asking, should we ban BLM in schools? First though, it's time for the latest news headlines.
Just after 4:30, the top stories. A rare red weather warning has been issued for South Wales and southwest England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to hit the UK tonight. Thousands of homes in parts of northern England and Scotland are still without power after Storm Dudley hit last night. Winds of more than 80 miles an hour caused power cuts and travel disruption. The Prime Minister has said the attack on a kindergarten in Ukraine was actually a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians, adding he feared something we'll see more of over the next few days. It comes after Ukraine's foreign minister claimed a village in Luhansk had been shelled by Russian-backed separatists from the occupied territory of Donbass. Speaking in Kiev, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been saying there's no evidence Russian forces are withdrawing from the Ukrainian border, and she's urged Russia to step back from the brink of war. She said Russia is ready, with allies, to impose tough economic sanctions. 105 people have now died and dozens are still missing after a mudslide swept away homes and cars in Brazil. Recovery efforts are ongoing in the mountain city of Petrópolis after 10 inches of rain fell within just 3 hours. Houses remain buried in the mud and 400 people are homeless. And finally, some good news for Team GB from the Beijing Winter Olympics. We're guaranteed our first medal of the Games after our men's curlers beat USA to reach the final. And Great Britain's women's team could join them. They've secured a place in the semi-finals with another win earlier on today. They play Sweden tomorrow in the final, for the men's curlers facing Sweden as well in the final on Saturday. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier will be back after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on DAB radio. This week we have brought you the story of a school in Lancashire which banned meat, and another in Nottinghamshire, which was accused of indoctrinating primary school children with political propaganda. Today, the government has said that teachers will be banned from promoting ideologies where no consensus exists. That includes very sensitive subjects, the likes of Black Lives Matter, the Israel-Palestine conflict and the historical role of the British Empire. The Education Secretary, Nadim Zahawi, unveiled the directive to stop promoting, or school teachers, as he put it, quote, promoting contested theories as fact. They will be told not to give one-sided accounts of national heroes, such as Winston Churchill, for instance, been branded as racist by some activists in recent years. Well, joining me to debate this, research fellow from the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Rakib Hassan, and chair of the Society of Black Lawyers, that is Peter Herbert. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it very much indeed. Peter, let's start with you, if I may. It seems that Black Lives Matter is in the crosshairs here from the Secretary of State for Education. What do you say to him? Do you feel this has got an important place in the classroom for the next generation? Do you understand why some people have misgivings?
Well, it's got an important place in the classroom, as does any piece of contemporary and relevant occurrence. So, you know, I just think it's very prescriptive for a government which clearly has a very political right-wing agenda to start dictating what people should hear. Every single aspect of politics or history is controversial. If you had this directive, you would have nothing taught in schools of historical significance. The Wars of the Roses and who won or lost or who did what were controversial. And so is the colonial empires. So I think this type of prescription from government, who clearly don't understand or know their history, really is unhelpful. It does not polarize communities. And I can remember a brilliant history teacher who talked about the Cold War and covered all aspects of it. And that was how I got my love of politics and my love of history. And so I just think that is a nonsensical directive. It's not done for any good purpose. If you want political indoctrination, then yes, you can find it in China, you can find it in Russia, and you can find it in certain primary schools all over the world. But I think, generally speaking, British primary and secondary schools do a very good job in giving people a holistic view of the curriculum, such as it is, and have an open debate between people who can agree and disagree.
Rakib Hassan, it doesn't polarise. What say you?
I couldn't disagree more. I think that the intervention by the Department for Education is an important one. I do feel that while it is difficult to teach sensitive historical events and contemporary issues, ultimately that is what our teachers in this country are paid to do. They're not paid to be political activists. And I do take issue with BLM-inspired materials being used in British classrooms. The reality of the matter is, when it comes to the BLM social movement, there are surveys now which show that a notable chunk of the British population believe that the social movement is divisive. There was a poll by Opinion which showed that 55% of Brits felt that BLM had increased racial tensions. That included a plurality of ethnic minority respondents. And I've personally done research which has shown that among Black British respondents, 1 in 2 believe that political activists have a disproportionately high level of influence in British schools. So I think there's very clearly an issue when it comes to the politicization of lessons. And I think that when we're looking at BLM in particular, and things such as white privilege theories, which are being presented as fact, that's something that can actually undermine social cohesion in younger sections of the British population. And we just cannot afford that.
Peter Herbert, just back to your point that, there's no difference between, for instance, choosing to teach something tendentious about the War of the Roses or the English Civil War compared to, say, Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's a huge difference, isn't there, which is that some of the dynamics that surround the Black Lives Matter movement are very present today and are part of the warp and weft of political decision-making. They're here, they're now, they're not 350 years ago.
Well, let me give you a better example then. This is more recent. I think, people who are not from the African Caribbean community don't really have much knowledge or ability to speak about the issues that affect our communities. They really don't. They're doing so as third parties.
Are you saying they haven't got a right to speak about it?
Therefore, yeah, they can have a right, but I'm saying they don't have that fundamental knowledge of experience, which we have. If not, then, we might as well as actually African Caribbean people just step to one side and let white people talk for us or anybody else talk for us. So it's important that we're heard. And that means actually listening to our experience, not an academic study, not research. Most of Britain's population want to bring back hanging. Does that mean say we do it? No. You take an educated and rounded view of what is in the interests of all children. And so, yes, contemporary history, say, for instance, the Bengal famine, where there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Churchill willingly addressed food supplies to British armed forces in the area of Bangladesh, is now modern Bangladesh, as a consequence of which 3 million people of Indian origin starved. Now, you can talk about the effects of that on those communities is still being felt today. So there are things, whether it's the possibility of a war between Ukraine and Russia, of course they're controversial, but so what? And I have not heard one piece of evidence from Dr. Iksan who has said that there is a Black Lives Matter issue being pushed in the school and exampled one iota of evidence. He speaks about white privilege. Well, isn't there white privilege? It has to be defined, it has to be explained, and it certainly doesn't operate in all circumstances. But it's undoubtedly the fact that the ruling elite is predominantly white, is predominantly male, and generally disproportionately went to Eton, Harrow, Oxford and Cambridge. And that is a reality. People can like to explain it by some other circumstance, but it does not equate to the experiences of a young black man on the streets of London or Liverpool being stopped and searched by the police.
Rakib Hassan, sorry, just to let Rakib Hassan have his say, what do you say to that?
Firstly, I'd make the point that as a British taxpayer, I'm more than entitled to express an opinion on what is potentially taught in British schools. Irrespective of race, ethnicity or religion, I do feel that any British citizen is entitled to express their personal view. Now, in terms of white privilege theories, this is where I feel that the problem truly lies. I think that when you're looking at the education system, if we want to talk about outcomes, the one group of pupils which is performing particularly badly in terms of school attainment are white working class boys. So I feel that if you're going to be teaching them about white privilege theories, which ultimately frames white males as some kind of hyper-advantaged section of society, quite frankly, I think that is incredibly counterproductive. I think that when it comes to teaching, we should be equipping British pupils, irrespective of their race, ethnicity, or religious background, with the knowledge and skills, and also with those interpersonal skills which allows them to develop bonds of social trust and mutual respect with people of different backgrounds, and equip them with the skills which will allow them to flourish as they enter adulthood.
Peter Herbert, Rakib Hassan there talking about bonds of social trust, social cohesion. There's an argument that says building up social cohesion requires that we have shared heroes, that we have things in common that we can all agree on. I don't know whether that means that Peter Herbert has pressed the off button on his camera.
No.
It's gone very... Peter Herbert, can you still hear us?
No, I think Peter's still there.
Hi.
No,
oh, there you are. We
thought
for a moment you'd been so outraged. Now, can I just pick up your point about Winston Churchill?
Yeah.
In reality, schools have only got so much time in there. There's only so much curriculum real estate to share out. And even less goes to history. On something like Winston Churchill, all historical figures of that magnitude are deeply complicated. 95%, we can argue about the figure, 75%. The lion's share of what he did was very much for the betterment of the human condition and our national story. The danger is that if you've got maybe, I don't know, in the course of any academic year, a couple of hours maybe dedicated to Winston Churchill for those pupils, and you spend half or more of that time talking about what a vile and pernicious character he was, that's the message they take away. Not that how he was the scourge of Nazism and he protected the world from a type of enslavement.
I think it's a very poor example. It depends upon your family's experience. I mean, if you want the descendants...
You brought it up.
Yeah, I'm saying If you're one of those, it depends who you are. If you're a white working class boy and you don't really care about Winston Churchill because he's not actually going to mean anything in post-Brexit Britain, or you're looking for a job, then fine. If, however, it's somebody who in your antecedents or roots are in that area of India where 3 million people starve to death, then yes, it will affect or has affected your view of the world. And therefore, who is looking and how they are looking and why they are doing so is important. And one of the books that you probably won't have heard of is called The Staying Power, The History of Black People in Britain. It is not taught on the curriculum, but it gives a lot of, which is lacking, is for African, Asian and Chinese people to have a pride in their contribution to British history. That's often absolutely ignored. And therefore, when Dr. Susanna is talking about, social cohesion, what he forgets is that we are often left out of the history. Whether we fought at Malplaquet, at Oudenaarde, on the Danube, with Wellington and at Waterloo, it is left out of our history. And the fact that you don't even know some of the great figures of the African American and African, British and Asian community who contributed to life is a sad fact, which the national curriculum has only just started to address with people, such as you will hear about Florence Nightingale, but you hear about Mary Seacole. So
we hear about Mary Seacole.
No, Mary Seacole's in the curriculum.
Yeah, Rakib Hassan, sorry, we've got about a minute left.
Her name is specifically mentioned in the curriculum.
You do now because we fought for it. It was not given and it was not on.
Sorry, please, we've only got about a minute left. I want to give that to Rakib Hassan. Rakib.
No, sure. I think that we can certainly have a debate in terms of, what kind of historical figures are included in lessons which are taught in British schools. I mean, I personally make the point that I've written a great deal about the African, Caribbean and South Asian contribution to British military victories. That's something that is certainly, that actually in a way, that could be in itself an exercise which helps young Brits of a variety of ethnic minority backgrounds. It can almost enhance their national sense of belonging. But my point is that the main issue that I have is the presentation of what I'd consider to be pseudo-intellectual race theories, many of them coming from American universities, potentially undermining social cohesion in British schools. And I do feel that the Department for Education should work against that.
Guys, we've got to leave it there. Rakib Hassan and Peter Herbert, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Just a brief word, if possible, from Tonya Buxton. As a former teacher, I'm sure you were listening to that with interest. Any thoughts?
My thoughts are we have hardly enough time to teach our children to read and write. So let's just keep it very basic and don't start going into politicising schools. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers do walk in because they come with their baggage and they do put it onto their kids. And we have to have a firmer look and a firmer line as to what our children are taught.
And is there not a recipe for divisiveness there in what Peter Herbert was saying, which is, OK, you're presenting history for one set of kids, depending on their background. You're presenting one version of history for another set of kids, depending on their ethnic background. That's a recipe for division, isn't it?
You can't do that. You have to just go on character. My grandfather, for example, came from Cyprus and he fought in the Second World War because Churchill told him that if he did, Cyprus would be granted independence. It wasn't granted independence and we carry on. I mean, we've all got gripes, we've all got crimes to say, but we have to put the children first.
Tonya, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, the UK's record dentist or dental appointment waiting lists. We'll reflect on that, but first, here's the weather.
Hello. The Met Office have issued a rare red warning because Storm Eunice arrives overnight and brings the risk of dangerous winds in places, especially parts of South Wales and southwest England. Ahead of Eunice, relatively calm this evening with clearing skies, showers easing and the winds dropping away for some time. So if you're heading to bed thinking it's quite calm out there, well, unfortunately, the winds really ramp up by around midnight or shortly after. Bands of rain sweep through very quickly, turning to snow over northern hills, and the winds continue to increase from the southwest during the early hours of Friday as Storm Eunice arrives. Now, this is a storm that's developed out of nowhere during the last 24 hours and will continue deepening as it approaches southwestern parts of the UK with the strongest core of winds on the southern flank of Eunice and bumping into cold air, the risk of significant snowfall over northern hills, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. In the amber warning area, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. In the red warning area, risk of 90 mile per hour wind gusts. and as a result, a red warning has been issued, a danger to life for Bristol Channel Coast, South Wales, North Somerset, North Devon, North Cornwall. Those winds peaking during the morning on Friday. Risk of flying debris from damaged structures and risk of widespread disruption across the southern half of the UK from those wind speeds, disruption to power, travel, as well as services. Across northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, some heavy rain at lower levels, some snow mixed in with that rain, but significant snow falling over the hills, 20 centimetres over some higher parts of northern England and southern Scotland, accompanied by strong winds, risk of blizzards and drifting of that snowfall. Later Friday, the winds finally start to relent, but the weekend stays wet and windy. Further gales expected at times, particularly in the far south on Saturday and northern areas on Sunday.
Hello, mate. Step into the studio, please.
How are you keeping? Busy?
I've got a brand new show coming on GB News called The Friday Night Feast.
Oh, yeah?
I'm going to take a new news angle on the week's biggest stories. Move it forward. I want to talk about what I think we should be talking about, not what we're being told that we have to. Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. A brand new show right here on GB News, The Friday Night Feast, 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. with me, Patrick Christie's. What could possibly go wrong, eh? Oh, I've left my wallet in a cab.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, now, have dental services been left to decay? We've heard lots about growing NHS waiting lists caused by COVID, elective surgery, minor ops, even some scans. But the pandemic has also meant a huge backlog when it comes to dentistry, with millions of patients waiting potentially for years to see a dentist. There is now a 40 million outstanding dental appointment list, with horror stories emerging. You'll have heard some of them, people resorting to desperate measures, pulling out their teeth with whatever it takes. The NHS doctor, Dr. Daniel Alaya, joins us now. Daniel, thanks so much for your time. Just in time. Hi, Doctor. Thanks very much indeed. Dentistry is the sort of Cinderella element of the NHS that's been, I think, forgotten about by some of us, hasn't it, in relation to waiting lists? But they're every bit as bad as things like elective surgery.
It's a pleasure to be with you. There is a huge issue with the dental waiting lists, and it's multifactorial. And I think the real question that we need to be asking ourselves is, do those waiting lists still need to be that long? So if we break it down, first of all, the first reason is, of course, the efficiency has gone down because they need to clean more. They need to do the deep cleaning processes and there's strict guidelines on social distancing. Now, if you think about the situation in hospitals, it was quite the same. In hospitals, I think we've been able to manage it a little bit better. Now we're sort of clearing up that backlog. But in dentistry, it seems that backlog is still there. And I think really it's about time we look at, do we still need those strict measures? Obviously, in the population, usage of masks has been, a bit more lenient now, and social distancing measures have been a bit lenient. And of course, more people have their vaccinations. So actually, maybe it's time that in dentists, we're able to calm things down and actually be able to catch up on the waiting list that we have and the backlog. And personally, I think it's time we do that.
Doctor, can we just change tack a little bit? Around about this time yesterday, we were talking to a colleague of yours, Vina Babu, for her reaction on the fact that 5-year-olds plus 5 years old and upwards in England will be offered a COVID jab. What's your take on that?
Children and people that are around 5 years old getting their appointments. Is that your question?
Yes, it is.
So I think the question to ask there is, how urgent are those appointments? How urgent are those appointments? Now, if those appointments are urgent, when it comes to infection that can possibly spread, or when it comes to obviously, teeth which may be lost, or serious infections and growth and things like that, then of course they need to be prioritized. Of course, we need to think, what can we do to increase the efficiency? I think a bigger question we need to be asking is, how can we create systems and processes in order to better triage, these dental appointments? Of course, with medicine and general medicine, we have the one-on-one system, Now, if we had a similar system where we could triage, and perhaps, there could be, a better usage of technology to actually see patients with dentistry, and to dentists or people that have, those skills, and then get the people that really need the help in, and that would be great, particularly when it comes to children. The truth
we have
is,
to leave it there.
the
Daniel,
NHS.
lawyer, thanks very much indeed. We're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. It's 5 o'clock. Coming up live at 5, the Cobra Emergency Committee meets to plan for what may be one of the worst storms to hit Britain in years. Storm Eunice due to make landfall in the next few hours. Also, as the British family of a man killed by a great white shark mourn his death in the waters off Sydney, a zoologist explains why and how one of our few natural predators decides to strike. And how odd is Belgium? Is their decision to adopt a 4-day working week an outlier or the beginning of a Europe-wide trend? Alongside me throughout the next hour, the broadcaster Tonya Buxton. But first, the headlines for you.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom, and our top story today, a rare red weather warning has been issued for South Wales and South West England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to hit the UK tonight. Damage to homes, further travel disruption and power cuts are all expected. Thousands of homes in parts of northern England and Scotland are still without power after Storm Dudley hit last night. GB News North East reporter Rachel Sweeney spoke to one householder in County Durham whose home had previously been damaged by Storm Arwen and Malik and is now damaged after Storm Dudley.
It was 9 days off with the electricity. Just had to do without that for 9 days. And then the second storm pulled some roofs, the roof tiles off, which hasn't been fixed, and I think that's what's caused this. The winds just come through like a raw thunder and just come through there and blew the front out.
How did you feel when you heard it?
We didn't know what to do, sort of shocked, just ran outside and then we just saw the hole.
Maria Sudd speaking there. Well, meteorologist Alex Deacon told GB News there is a real risk to life in the red warning area when Storm Eunice hits the UK tonight and tomorrow.
Red warnings are rare. We don't issue them on a whim. We only issue a red warning when we're seriously concerned and there's a threat to life. So red warnings, 1 or 2 a year at most. This is a serious situation. It is potentially very dangerous in that red warning area across parts of South Wales and South West England.
Alex Deakin. Well, in other news today, Boris Johnson says an attack on a kindergarten in Ukraine was in fact a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians. It comes after Ukraine's foreign minister claimed a Ukrainian village in the Luhansk region had been shelled by Russian-backed separatists from the occupied territory of Donbass. Speaking on a visit to RAF Waddington in Lincolnshire, the Prime Minister said the picture in Ukraine continues to be grim.
Today, as I'm sure you've already picked up, a kindergarten was shelled in what we're taking to be we know was a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians, designed to create a pretext, a spurious provocation for Russian action. We fear very much that is the kind of thing we'll see more of over the next few days.
Boris Johnson speaking earlier. Well, meanwhile, speaking at a United Nations Security Council meeting, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this is a moment of peril for the lives of millions.
Russia says it's drawing down those forces. We do not see that happening on the ground. Our information indicates clearly that these forces, including ground troops, aircraft, ships, are preparing to launch an attack against Ukraine in the coming days.
Antony Blinken. Well, at the same event, James Cleverly, Minister for Europe and North America, said Russia had made misleading statements about troop withdrawals.
In the past days, we have heard Russian claims that some units are returning to barracks. It is, however, all too clear that the opposite is in fact true, and the Russian military build-up continues. There should be no doubt that any further Russian incursion into Ukraine would be a massive strategic mistake and a humanitarian disaster that will be met with strength.
James Cleverly speaking there, and we will keep you up to date on events on the Ukrainian-Russian border throughout the day here on GB News. The Home Secretary has stopped the preferential golden visa option for wealthy foreign investors seeking residency in the UK amid security concerns. The closure of the Tier 1 investor visa route affects all new applicants from all nationalities with immediate effect. Priti Patel saying the move will help stop corrupt elites threatening national security. It follows concerns that some applicants acquired their wealth illegitimately and were associated with wider corruption. 3 police officers have been charged with sending grossly offensive WhatsApp messages to the killer of Sarah Everard. The 2 serving and 1 former Met Police officers reportedly shared racist and misogynist messages while working with the former Met officer Wayne Couzens in 2019. They're set to appear at Magistrates Court in Westminster on the 16th of March. Police Scotland will be the first force in the UK to issue all of its officers with an overdose spray. All operational officers will now be equipped with the anti-overdose naloxone kits and trained in their use. The spray counters the effects of drugs such as heroin and can save the lives of people who may be overdosing. In the 6-month pilot period, Police Scotland saved over 60 lives with naloxone. You're with GB News. We'll have more news as it happens. Now back to Colin Brazier.
Well, in a few hours' time, Wales and the southwest of England are expected to be hit by anything up to 100-mile-per-hour winds. A red weather warning as a consequence has been issued by the Met Office. Well, the last time that happened was Storm Arwen in November. It caused, as I'm sure you'll remember, extensive power cuts as well as substantial damage, especially in Scotland and the northeast of England. This storm, Storm Eunice, will arrive in earnest from 7 a.m. tomorrow, so says the Met Office, with coastal areas and the cities of Swansea, Cardiff and Bristol set to bear the brunt of the damage. The government's Cobra Committee has met today to make contingency plans ahead of the storm's arrival. And in the last couple of hours or thereabouts, all trains in Wales for tomorrow have been cancelled. 1,000 miles of track that will be checked before the trains run again. We'll turn to the weatherman and watcher, Phil Morris, for his meteorological take on what's likely to happen. Phil, welcome to you. I say from 7 a.m. till noon tomorrow. Actually, the forecast seems to be really from the winds picking up to serious levels from 5 a.m. all the way through to sort of 9 p.m. So we're in for a day of it.
We certainly are. It's one of the strongest storms we've had for many, many years indeed. It's also travelling much further south than low pressures usually do. This one was born from Newfoundland on Wednesday night. She's been steaming across the Atlantic Ocean, caused by a big temperature differential between very warm air coming up from the south and cold air coming from Canada. She's hooked to ride on the jet stream, which is the high level winds which come across the Atlantic, and now she's deepening really, really, very rapidly, and she's going to be a very deep storm. And with this storm, it's actually going to affect a large amount of the population that doesn't usually receive these storms. Now she's coming in, as you see, overnight. She's going to arrive in Ireland first, and then cross in the morning. She'll be across Liverpool Bay by lunchtime over Yorkshire in England, and out by 3 o'clock into the North Sea. Now we're going to get winds south of her zone of generally 60 to 70 miles an hour, and then up to 80 miles an hour in gusts. Now I live in the Midlands. Only 2 or 3 times in my lifetime I've had winds that strong. The Burn Day storm, the 25th of January 1990 is one of those, and going right back before 1976. So winds of this strength are really very, very rare indeed. And a red warning has been issued for Wales and the southwest of England. They're even worried about storm surges. There will be huge waves and a storm surge going up the Bristol Channel. This really is one of the 4 or 5 storms of the century, and it's really, really very powerful indeed.
Apologies if you're listening on radio, but if you are watching, we're looking at pictures of Storm Dudley, rain sheeting across roofs, across roads, alongside traffic there as well. More of that to come. Storm Dudley resulted in 14,000 homes being left without power. Phil, as you're making clear, this is potentially considerably worse. I just wonder, when it comes to the computational power that goes into projecting what's happened or likely to happen, what is the sort of margin for error? I mean, as you pitch it to us today, and you know, sometimes it can feel like we're bombarded with weather warnings, and sometimes they don't transpire into being as ferocious as they turned out. But you do seem to be suggesting that this could be really very bad.
Yes, it is indeed. Now, since Monday, when all the weather models came into agreement, now sometimes you get weather warnings a couple of weeks in ahead with weather you can't accurately forecast. But as from Monday, all the models are very, very adamant we're going to get this really very severe storm come Friday. And they've held course all the way along. She's now developing as she was scheduled to do so, and she will be coming in tonight and tomorrow. As I want to stress to people, this is a change your plans situation. It's going to be a very dangerous day out there tomorrow. Do not travel unless you have to at all, anywhere really, because it's a life and death situation, particularly in the southwest where the red warning's been issued. But say 80 mile an hour gusts, they will take down walls, trees, even roofs. Dangers of flying debris. Last time we had a storm like this, say in the Burns Day storm in 90, we had 50 people died from flying debris on that day. And again, another problem with this storm, it's arriving in the middle of the day, going right through a Friday, which is very, very bad timing indeed, where everyone's going to be about. Most school children are still in school. So it's a very dangerous situation. So please take heed of the warnings and try and stay out of it. And Friday night she'll be into the North Sea and out into the Low Countries on Saturday. But then even after that, we have some other storms, but this is really the one to watch.
Yeah, you know, Phil, just one final thought, really. I mean, it's not about meteorology. It's more about how we set about contingency planning, really, because it becomes a bit of a nightmare for those people in local authorities, even central government. You mentioned, you know, the risk from debris, trees. It's going to happen, the worst of it, in the middle of the day. Some schools have been closed. I think Bristol's taken a decision to close its schools. And you move down that M4 corridor, you get down to places like Legoland in Windsor, that's going to close all the way into London. The London Eye is going to close tomorrow. We understand that. But at what point, if you are, you know, running the education department of a local authority or a head teacher, you're scratching your head this evening, aren't you? Slightly thinking, well, you know, if I'm in Swindon or, you know, somewhere in the southwest, what do I do?
Well, in fact, anywhere south of that line from Yorkshire down to south, we're going to have exceptional winds tomorrow. Now, for most children, some are on half time. I am a teacher in Leicestershire and we're off this week, but most are off next week. I would have half term a day early just for the sheer dangers of this storm could bring. People are much safer in their homes and wandering around or at school. It would be far, far safer just to do that, have one day in safety. This really is a storm. We've really got to get across to people how dangerous this is going to be and how strong the winds are going to be and the damage it can cause. So if I was in that position, I would be closing my school tomorrow because of the danger of the children. Give them an extra day and keep them safe.
And for many of them, it's either half-term already or it begins next week, doesn't it? So it becomes an easier choice. Phil Morris, really good to talk to you.
Right.
Thanks very much.
Thank
for
you.
your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tonya Buxton alongside me. It would be tempting to draw parallels with the cost-benefit analysis that goes with COVID, for instance, but we're not going to do that because this is different, isn't it?
It is different.
It's a one-day event.
It's a one-day event.
Better to be prudent.
In this case, I do think it is. We haven't had, as he said, a storm this strong before. I think if I lived in Bristol, I'd be keeping my little ones home. I mean, it's half term for us. My children are home. I wouldn't let them go out. I'd keep them home. I would.
Do you remember the great storm of late 1980?
Yes, we're the same age.
Yeah,
and I remember. I remember.
But the point
that
then,
was at night. You see, that's the thing. And what
well, it wasn't predicted. That was the key thing, wasn't
it? Oh, yes. It was actually told that it didn't happen, poor Michael Fish. Do you remember? He said, there is no storm coming. So this is predicted, and it's during the day. And that's what worries me, you know, because there's building works done everywhere, and I see scaffolding everywhere. I've got it down my road at some of the houses down the road, and I think, gosh, if it gets really windy, is that scaffolding sturdy enough to not come through my windows? So it is a worry.
Yeah, and, you know, roads, falling trees, train derailments. We didn't get into the fact there's expected to be some localised flooding as well. You get the surges, the tidal surges as well. So all ends up time to be cautious tomorrow. Tonya, thanks for now, at least. We're going to move on to this story. A British man has been killed by a 14-foot-long shark while training for a charity swim in Sydney. It's thought to be the first fatal shark attack off the Australian capital in more than 60 years, an incident that sparked a large-scale hunt for the creature. The victim, Simon Nellist, spent time in the Royal Air Force before moving to Australia. He leaves behind a fiancée who he met in the country and who he was told, we are told, he was planning to marry before the wedding was delayed by COVID. A shocking story, but does it flag up any shifting trends, perhaps, in the waters off the Australian coastline? Paul Cox is the Managing Director at the Shark Trust, who joins me now. Paul, welcome to you. Shark attacks do happen off the Australian coastline. I was surprised to hear this was the first one in 60 years off Sydney.
Yeah, this is a tragic one, and you know, I think the first thing we have to say is our hearts go out to the family and friends of Simon Nellist. It's the first fatality of Sydney from a shark attack in since 1963. Part of the reason for that is New South Wales has some of the most complex and best shark protection measures, or measures to keep sharks away from swimmers and bathers anywhere in the world. And they have a wide range of measures, including nets, and they tag and trace sharks. They have helicopter patrols, drone patrols. They have quite an advanced system of alerts for people using the water to get people out of the water if they think that the risk is too high of interactions. So, you know, it is a sophisticated system, but, you know, nothing is 100%. And tragically, in this case, that's been proven.
Yeah, and some of those systems that you refer to, Paul, I mean, they are controversial, I read. I mean, I'd never heard of drum lines before. Obviously, shark nets we've heard of, but the idea of drum lines, maybe you can explain to our viewers and listeners what they are.
Yeah, I mean, a drum line is essentially a baited hooks, which they aim to catch target species, which in that part of Australia, they're really looking at tiger sharks, great whites, and bull sharks, which are the three that are most commonly associated with biting. And they'll catch the sharks and hold them, and then they will either be there have been cases where the sharks are just killed or culled to reduce the population sizes, or the sharks are tagged and taken away from the scene where they're caught and released with a tag on, and then they use that tag to monitor the movements of the sharks and get a better idea of when they're moving into these kind of areas where they might come into contact with bathers.
Paul, is there a protocol, do you know, when this type of fatality happens? Will the authorities, I'm not sure who they are necessarily, whether it's the Coast Guard, whether it would be another agency involved here, would they seek out the shark that they think was responsible? Do they take other measures? Is there a protocol that's followed?
Yeah, I'm no expert on this, but we have a very different set of risks in the UK, thankfully with sharks. But I think that they are. The intention with this is to try and drumline for this shark and catch it. And then I believe, from everything I've read today, that they are looking at releasing it. I don't believe that there's currently a plan to cull this shark. It can be a very controversial action, culling sharks, and I mean even nets and drumlines themselves. There's always a trade-off really between human safety and animal welfare, and the nets have been known to catch a lot of wildlife, sharks and other wildlife, and so there's always a tension locally around these measures, and they just have to find the right balance really.
Paul, I've got my studio guest with me, Tonya Buxton. We're about the same age, and I suspect we were both scarred by the imagination of Steven Spielberg when it comes to sharks. I mean that seriously. I mean, there is a sense in which, I mean, I'm speaking for you.
Yes,
Tonya,
no, absolutely.
That we belong to that generation for whom one pesky film left us with a deep-seated and irrational fear. And I was just really entering into my peroration. Oh, there, you're back, Paul. Yeah. So talk us down, talk us off that deep-seated irrational fear, or is it actually the product of some evolutionary process?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, it's yes, there's no doubt that Jaws has had an impact. I hope you can hear me. You can't see me moving.
No, I can.
I think it's I think it is. There's no doubt that Jaws has had an impact on the psyche, and particularly things like this idea of a rogue shark, where in Jaws we saw the story around the shark which just kind of kept coming back, and that kind of theory that an individual shark will keep coming back has not been really supported by any evidence over the years. But it is a deep-seated fear, and it is to a certain degree rational, because we don't really belong in the water. We enter the water and we share the water with animals which have evolved there and which have senses more attuned to that environment. And so whenever we enter the water, we take on a risk, and that whether that's risk from riptides or or from drowning or from poisonous marine life, and sharks are part of that mix. We have to be very aware of those risks and manage them to our best ability. You were just talking about risks in relation to the storm, COVID, indeed. That's something that we have.
Paul,
to
I
do
think your audio has finally given up the ghost. We're going to say thanks for now. Paul Cox, the Managing Director at the Shark Trust, with his thoughts there on that dreadful attack off Sydney. Tonya Buxton's alongside me. I spoke for you, which is always a dangerous thing to do.
No, you're completely right. Absolutely, completely right. And the thing is, what I've got in my mind is if they don't take that shark and unfortunately cull it or take it far, far, far away, will it not then know that it's got easy prey on that beach and keep coming back like it did in Jaws? Because that's it. It's ingrained in our brains. It really does frighten me. I'm Cypriot, so my family would go back to the island every single year, and I didn't want to go in the sea.
Really?
Yes, it petrified me. That film petrified me.
Yeah, I know. I've swum off the beach at Perth, and 2 weeks after I was there was a fatal shark attack. And you think, for those surfers who go in day after day after day, in South Africa or Australia, wherever it is, where there is a known risk of a shark attack. I mean, I salute their bravery, but I think they're slightly potty.
I mean, likewise. And there is that young girl who was an Olympian surfer, wasn't she, that had her arm taken off and then learnt to surf again and continued to compete. See, that type of bravery I don't possess.
No, can't relate to that.
No, not at all.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, coming up, we're going to reflect on the gold medalist raised in San Francisco who chose to represent China instead of the United States. There she is. Also models. Did she choose dictatorships over freedom or bring nations together, as she claims? The weather's first.
Hello. The Met Office have issued a rare red warning because Storm Eunice arrives overnight and brings the risk of dangerous winds in places, especially parts of South Wales and southwest England. Ahead of Eunice, relatively calm this evening with clearing skies, showers easing and the winds dropping away for some time. So if you're heading to bed thinking it's quite calm out there, well, unfortunately, the winds really ramp up by around midnight or shortly after. Bands of rain sweep through very quickly, turning to snow over northern hills, and the winds continue to increase from the southwest during the early hours of Friday as Storm Eunice arrives. Now, this is a storm that's developed out of nowhere during the last 24 hours and will continue deepening as it approaches southwestern parts of the UK with the strongest core of winds on the southern flank of Eunice and bumping into cold air, the risk of significant snowfall over northern hills, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. In the amber warning area, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. In the red warning area, risk of 90 mile per hour wind gusts. And as a result, a red warning has been issued. A danger to life for Bristol Channel Coast, South Wales, North Somerset, North Devon, North Cornwall. Those winds peaking during the morning on Friday. Risk of flying debris from damaged structures and risk of widespread disruption across the southern half of the UK from those wind speeds, disruption to power, travel, as well as services. Across northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, some heavy rain at lower levels, some snow mixed in with that rain, but significant snow falling over the hills, 20 centimetres over some higher parts of northern England and southern Scotland, accompanied by strong winds, risk of blizzards and drifting of that snowfall. Later Friday, the winds finally start to relent, but the weekend stays wet and windy. Further gales expected at times, particularly in the far south on Saturday and northern areas on Sunday.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone.
We learn from it and try and move on. That's it.
Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, a young woman announces her intention to help skiing take root in China. Because she's a gold medalist, her words carry quite a lot of weight. A generation of young Chinese see her as an inspiration. What's not to like? Well, there's another side to this story, and it's drawn politicians into a pretty vicious war of words. The latest coming from Nikki Haley, the former US ambassador to the UN, no less. Why? Because the young woman concerned is Eileen Gu. She's pictured there. She's 18. Apologies if you're listening on the radio. Very pretty young woman, 18, born and raised in California, to an American father and Chinese mother. But 3 years ago, she announced her intention to ski, not for America, but for China. And some Americans have accused her, effectively, of a type of treachery. Well, the co-founder of Hong Kong Watch is Benedict Rogers, who joins us now. Benedict, welcome to you. An odd story, this. It's hard to know, it's hard to leap to any judgments, not that we should leap to judgments, without knowing all the facts, and in particular, what's the motivation for some of these decisions?
Well, that's right, and I'm cautious about leaping to any judgments. I don't have any particular criticism of her for choosing to play for China, ski for China. I think anyone who is, has heritage from two countries has the right to choose which country they want to represent. And I think we should always draw a distinction between China as a country and the Chinese Communist Party regime. But where I think there is an issue is around the question of censorship. Her, as I understand it, pretty much endorsing or defending the Chinese regime's censorship by saying it's okay, people can access the internet by VPN, and then in fact her being censored for doing that. And I think that's the issue rather than representing China.
How much, Benedict, have the Winter Olympics so far being a window into the current temperature of free speech in China, do you think? There was a story, wasn't there? I think, was it a Finnish competitor who filmed on her smartphone parts of the Olympic Village, was it, that was slightly underwater, and the phone was confiscated? I may have got the wrong end of the stick on that one. What's the overall impression you're forming of how open this is working in the Winter Olympics?
I think it has really exposed what people like myself and others who work on China have known for a long time, the really severe repression and censorship of the Chinese regime. I mean, as I understand it, there were active threats to athletes not to speak out, not to criticize, and not only on political issues, but as you cite the example of the Finnish athlete, even posting stories that perhaps are negative, showing flooding. So I think all of this, the whole picture shows the regime's repression and censorship. And it's worth just adding that in the midst of all this, not because of the Olympics, but whilst the Olympics are going on, the website of my own organization, Hong Kong Watch, has been blocked in Hong Kong on Monday this week. So this is a regime that has always been repressive, but is under Xi Jinping really intensifying its intolerance of any kind of dissent.
In a sense, Benedict, I mean, I know clearly we lament it and we ought to be indignant about an organisation like yours being censored by the Chinese Communist Party. But you know, there's a rationale to that. Well, there was a story last week which I'd like to run by you and pass to our viewers too, which I just find absolutely baffling because it speaks to a kind of prissiness in the Chinese Communist Party. Episodes of Friends in which they'd censored lesbian characters, talk of orgasms. There's a sort of prissiness there. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there has under Xi Jinping been quite a crackdown on LGBT rights, and I think this is part of that. And of course, it follows a different type of censorship, but the censorship of the film Fight Club, where they actually changed the ending of the film so that the anarchists in the story didn't succeed in blowing up the buildings at the end of the film, but instead, in their new version, the police saved the day, and it was designed to send the message that authority and the police force triumph and kind of save the day. So whatever it is, whether it's Fight Club or Friends, if they don't like the narrative, they're going to try and change it. and that's replicated with their influence in Hollywood and indeed in multilateral organizations in the international rules-based order, which they're trying to subvert as well.
Yeah, it's easy to titter about that sort of thing, but actually it's deadly serious, really, isn't it? Benedict, thanks so much for talking to us today. Really appreciate it. Tonya Buxton alongside me to reflect on that, whether it's Eileen Gu and that change of a flag of convenience almost, or more broadly what's happening in China. What do you think?
I'm petrified of what's happening in China, and I'm petrified it's happening more and more here. I know that my social media has been censored on quite a few times, but I'm not actually speaking.
That's a big word, censored.
They're censored. It is censored because, you know, I have this thing saying that this has been fact-checked and this is sensitive and this isn't true. And the thing is, I don't actually put anything out that I haven't read a lot of reports about, and because I'm quite fearful of saying the wrong thing. And you know, I'm constantly being told that I'm not a doctor or an immunologist or a virologist when it comes to talking about COVID. So I double check all of my facts, and a lot of them they come up with a line saying that this is COVID sensitive. So I am being censored in Britain.
Tonya, you know what some people will say to you, though. They'll say, well, hang on, don't liken your plight to those of, for instance, people in Hong Kong who are...
I'm not, but there is a small end of a wedge there, isn't there? When Britain is being known for its free speech, it's what I love about being British most of all, is that, you know, you can say something that I fundamentally disagree with, but I will fight for your right to say it. And that makes me very proud to be British, and we're losing that. We're losing it every single day. So we have to make sure that we don't end up like China. I mean, look at the censorship there. It's frightening.
Tonya, for now. Thanks very much. After the break, the Ukrainian ambassador will be with me. Claims that Putin's troops are being withdrawn have been dismissed by the Ukrainians. We'll get his thoughts on that. But first, the latest news headlines with Colin.
Colin, thank you. Your top story today, a rare red weather warning has been issued for South Wales and South West England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to come barrelling into the UK tonight. In Cornwall, a major incident has been declared already as residents are being advised not to travel unless absolutely necessary. Bristol City Council is also advising schools to close in the city because of the weather. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White has more on GB News' coverage of the impact of Storm Eunice across the UK.
Storm Dudley has already barrelled across the country, the smaller of two storms battering Britain in as many days. But Dudley still left very significant damage. Trees down, roofs lifted off, major disruption to travel. In the hours ahead, it's the turn of Storm Eunice, a much more powerful weather event with red warnings of 100-mile-an-hour winds, tidal surges and snow for some. For Storm Eunice, continuing coverage. Stay with GB News.
Mark White. Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said the attack on a kindergarten in Ukraine was a false flag operation designed to discredit the Ukrainians, adding he feared it's something we'll see more over the next few days. It comes after Ukraine's foreign minister claimed a village had been shelled by Russian-backed separatists from Donbass. Meanwhile, the Russian news agency Interfax reports the country has pulled back some of its troops from Crimea, which borders Ukraine, to their base in Russian Chechnya. But speaking in Kiev, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said there was no evidence Russian forces were withdrawing from the Ukrainian border, and she urged Russia to step back from the brink of war. She said Britain is ready with allies to impose tough economic sanctions if Russia doesn't comply. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Colin Brazier's here after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We talked a while earlier, didn't we, about the fact the government here in the UK is looking to lay down the law a little more firmly for British schools, or at least in England, where Nadhim Zahawi, the Secretary of State for Education, is concerned, and saying to teachers, saying to heads, look, if you are going to teach stuff that's contentious politically, give it a wide berth, or at least offer a very balanced picture. Well, parents would be given greater oversight too of what their children are taught when it comes to things like race, gender, sexuality, under a law that's been proposed in the US state of Kansas. It's something they're grappling with there too, in a different way. Schools would be required to publish their lesson plans for inspection by parents. Schools and libraries that distributed material deemed inappropriate for children could, at least in theory, face criminal charges. Well, the author, Andrew Claven, joins us now. Andrew, welcome to you. The way I build it there with that kind of sanction potentially in breach of criminal law and all that flows from that sounds pretty heavy. But I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will be nodding in agreement at the idea that parents get a say of what's going on to those blank slates of minds.
Yes, of course. I think the teachers are putting forward the argument that we're professionals, we know what we're doing. Why should parents who might not be as educated as we are have control over what we teach their children? But what we've learned in the past 2 years is that they're teaching our children a lot of very strange and creepy stuff. They are teaching them that whiteness, just being white, means you might be an oppressor, that being black means you might just be a victim. They're teaching people that children, that their gender is not the gender they think it is, but it could be some other gender. You might think you're a boy, but you might really be a girl. All of these radical ideas have been exposed in our classrooms, and when parents have gone to protest, not only have school boards thrown them back and basically said you have no right to protest, they've actually asked the federal government, the FBI, to investigate them as terrorists, which the FBI has basically said it would do. It has been there's been a massive pushback, and now what you're seeing, not just in Kansas, but in places that you wouldn't expect, you are seeing basically a parents' revolt, and it has had incredible political shocks, but also cultural shocks throughout the country, because suddenly these people who thought that they were getting away with this, what I don't know if you have the same phrase there, we call it woke leftism, where suddenly everything is about race, everything is about gender, your gender is mutable, your race is not, weirdly enough. All of that stuff is being pushed back by sometimes very liberal parents. I'm in the state of Virginia, which was a purple state leaning blue, leaning toward the Democrat side, and suddenly it's a red state. And it's a red state mostly because the Republican candidate went out there and he said, I'm going to give parents more rights, and has proceeded to do exactly that. And I think it was yesterday in San Francisco, and you have to understand, San Francisco is left of left. If you get any further left than San Francisco, you actually fall into the sea. they actually recalled 3 school board members, the people who run our public schools, our government schools, and recalled them for teaching this woke nonsense and for keeping schools closed in the face of COVID when they should have reopened them. So this is a real rebellion, and the Democrats, who have a very, very small majority in Congress, are seeing this. They see this coming down the pike, and they know it could mean a massive defeat in November. And culturally, it's also important because it's a mother's rebellion. It's because mothers had to stay home with their children during COVID, and they got to see what was going on. So it's a slap in the face to feminists who have basically relegated homemaking to a lesser job. People who say, oh, you're just a homemaker, you're just a mom. We suddenly realize why they wanted these women out of the home, because when they're home, they see what's going on and they don't like it much, and they are not afraid to go into these school boards and protest very, very loudly. So this is a mama bear revolt, as they call it.
Yeah. Andrew, we're going to stick with this because initially the audio was dreadful. I was going to get it from my desk and go and beat somebody in our audio department. Too much bass, not enough treble. But I think they've had a fiddle. What audio department, says somebody on my ear. Right they are. On the broad principle of this idea that one person's contested is another settled fact, what do we say to those people who say that's the distinction? There's always going to be, whatever you're teaching, for some people, if it's remotely controversial, for some people it's settled fact, for other people it's in play.
Well, let's start with the fact that only 50% of Americans can read at an 8th grade level. If you're not teaching our kids to read and you're not teaching them math, you better start there before you start telling them your opinions of what race is. Secondly, this country is founded, it's based on the idea that race is secondary to belief and the content of your character. And when you start teaching our children that their whiteness, their essential whiteness, has made them oppressors, you're teaching something that is radically opposed to everything, every basis on which this country stands. And so that's really not a matter of opinion. There are certain things called axioms, we call them self-evident truths, that are already established. The argument is over. The argument is over whether we're going to put race above belief and content of character. For the teachers to just unilaterally decide that, no, we're going to teach your children racism because now it's good racism, now it's anti-white racism. No, that is not something that is just opinion. Meanwhile, as I say, these are things that affect little children, and really it is parents who have the first right to decide what children learn, and that's in the UN Charter as well. That's not just something that we're making up out of whole cloth. This is something that the entire free world understands, that parents have first right to what their children learn and how their children are taught. So first of all, teach our children how to read, teach them how to add, and second of all, you better consult with parents before you start teaching your incredibly radical and I think incredibly retrograde opinions about race and your completely unproven and limited ideas about gender. All through human history, we have understood that there were boys and girls. We know exactly how to identify them. It's the first thing you see when they come out of the womb. Suddenly they have decided that, no, this is not true, but there's no scientific basis for that. So why it should be taught in schools at all, I have no idea.
Andrew Claven, really good to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Tonya Buxton is alongside me and was I was a teacher for 8 years. I was going to say primary school teacher.
Yeah.
There is that constant tension, isn't there, between the fact that most parents feel that they are my children and I am their first educator, and the state that says parents can't always be trusted to get it right.
Yes, I mean, it is a very fine line, and having taught in Tottenham, which is quite a challenging area in many ways, I felt that fine line very much. But on these fundamental subjects, and like you said, it's a mama bear war. Don't mess with mothers when it comes to their children and what they're being taught. We're seeing that now with the COVID vaccines
Somebody
as
once
well.
said to me, Google mothers against, and you get a lot of mothers against.
You really do.
You don't get many fathers against.
No, you don't want to mess with us. And if we think, and as he said, I couldn't believe about the literacy levels of the American children. These teachers need to get back to teaching and educating these children. These kids have been out of school for a very, very long time. And what have these teachers been looking at? They've been looking at these polarising ideas, these political ideas, instead of getting back to basics, getting kids back in school, teaching them, normalising life again, and actually caring about the child's psychology rather than putting things into their head that aren't necessarily so.
not for the first time this afternoon, I find myself saying amen to that. Thank you. Belgium has become the first European country to allow private sector workers to demand a 4-day working week. Full-time employees will be expected to work the same number of hours, but may be able to condense their Monday to Friday 5-day working week down to 4 days if they can agree that with their employers. The Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs is Annabel Denham, who joins us now. Annabel, welcome to you. A 4-day week for the Belgians then?
Yes, that's right. I think what we have to bear in mind is that while it may look like Belgium is creating this workplace panacea, it's actually far from the truth. They have a very overregulated labour market. They have very high labour taxes. And as a consequence, partly, they have an employment rate that's around 10 percentage points lower than the one we have here in the UK. So while I'm all in favour, Colin, of voluntary arrangements between employers and their employees over 4-day weeks, a right to disconnect, flexible working, I don't think the state ought to be mandating it, and there will be all sorts of negative consequences, unintended consequences, as we can see happening on the continent.
When you say unintended consequences, Annabel, what do you have in mind?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we need to bear in mind is that all employment regulation comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to businesses that either disincentivizes taking on new workers, it can lead to lower pay for existing workers, it can be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. The government, it controls around 20% of the pay of over 20% of the workforce. It controls hiring and firing procedures, entry into pension schemes, the number of holidays, sick pay, maternity pay. Already, we do have a very regulated employment system here in the UK, and like I said, it runs the risk of making it more difficult for those out of work to get into work, even though it may be beneficial to some workers who are already in work. But if it is beneficial to them, then it's likely going to be beneficial to the business, in which case they can come to their own voluntary arrangements. We do not need the government interfering here. And yet this seems to be the direction of travel. Of course, we've got the Labour Party saying that were it to come into power, it would be mandating flexible working. It's very keen on the idea of a 4-day week and a right to disconnect, which is the idea that essentially between the hours of 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. your employer is not allowed to contact you. You turn off your computer and you are free to enjoy your evening. But again, that comes with unintended consequences, such as the fact that employers are going to expect their employees to be pretty much chained to their desks between the hours of 9 and 5, which really undermines the flexibility that a lot of people have come to value over the course of the pandemic. And just talking again about the 4-day working week, I think that what we may see are some workers who are more able, who are more willing, who are perhaps more ambitious, working that 5th day. And I can imagine us getting to a situation where there are 2 tracks, where you have possibly working mothers working the 4 days, but you have those who don't have children or don't have childcare or caring responsibilities working the 5th day, and therefore commanding higher wages or progressing up the career ladder more quickly. Or alternatively, they may seek a second job on that 5th day.
Annabel, Annabel, we're going to cut it short. We've got an important guest we need to get to, but Annabel Denham with the Institute of Economic Affairs, thanks very much indeed for your time today. Now, has Russia tried to manage an attack on a nursery to make it look like the work of Ukrainian forces, a so-called false flag operation that would give it the pretext to send in the army? Joining me now, Vadim Prystaiko, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom. Mr. Ambassador, thanks again for coming in to talk to us. We appreciate your time. Where do you, just on a point of clarification, where is the Ukrainian government now on the question of NATO membership? You'll know how it was reported, the suggestion that you made, perhaps, according to some people, that maybe NATO membership was in play as part of a negotiation with the Russians. Do you still want to join NATO?
Sure. And this part of conversation was not even with Ukraine, but with the NATO. Russians wanted NATO to roll back on 1997 line. You have to remember what was in 1997 when NATO was. And they also wanted that none of us join, like us, Georgians, whoever wanted, those nations who wanted it right now. So this is conversation between NATO and we told Russians immediately that NATO is our choice. We don't have anything better in this part of the globe. The end of the story. Where we can have some compromises, this is so-called Minsk process, which we are now in negotiations with them, how this part of Ukraine, which is already occupied, will be ruled.
I was talking to somebody earlier today about how what's happening to your country is having an effect on the continent of Europe. And for some people, it's opening up big dividing lines. They look, for instance, at Germany's reluctance to be seen to be criticising too much, perhaps, Russia for reasons to do with their supply of gas and other assets. And we look at the fact they supplied your government with, what was it, 5,000 helmets? And
after 7 years of war, 500 helmets offered.
How would you describe the attitude that's been struck by the German government towards Ukraine?
I am trying at this particular moment when we have an enemy to fight with. I don't want to, anybody to put certain wedge between our allies and ourselves. We will leave the criticizing part afterwards. We manage to sort out all the deals. That's what I believe. We have to be united, even if we are not happy sometimes with the reaction.
Mr. Ambassador, that's why you're a diplomat, because you speak diplomatically. Can we just talk a little bit about what's happening as things look, not just on a map, but on the ground in Ukraine right now? Our viewers are confused. I'm confused about whether his forces, Putin's forces, are coming or they're going.
I'm confused myself. That's what they're doing. They're coming, they're leaving, they're telling that the exercises are over by the end of the week. They'll be back to Siberia, where they came from. At the same time, they told that Ukrainian Nazis, fascists, whatever they call us, are doing something against. At the same time, shelling the school and the kindergarten, which they did today. Probably expecting now, provocating us to the response, which they will use against for their next attack, and so on and so forth.
What do you say to those people who do argue that what you're trying to do by maintaining the territorial integrity of your country is a fool's errand? It's not sustainable. Your country has one future, and that's a kind of partition, that those parts of the East, which are ethnically Russian, and they speak Russian, and it's a different kind of culture from what you see in the West and elsewhere, let it go. If it wants to become separatist, let it go.
Some people speak Russian, some speak Ukrainian, some people speak Greek, Bulgarian, German. All the place around the Black Sea used to be so much international. The city I am from, the Odessa, is next to Black Sea. First mayor was French. Should we ask French to come? So this place is, all the history is so vibrant in our part of the globe. If you go far, you will find anything you like. The reason is now for our existence that we agreed, all of us, that we live in our national states with the particular borders. When we peacefully divorced in 1991 with Russians, Belarusians, and the rest of the Soviet Union, we agreed that we will all go with our territories, which were at the Soviet times. We signed agreements, we shook the hands, and we went. In 30 years, they came to redraw, starting with Crimea, now they're in east of Ukraine.
Mr. Ambassador, can I just ask you a personal question? I mean, most of the time that diplomats spend in a foreign capital is spent glad-handing and attending receptions and doing all the things that diplomats do. It's hard to turn on a TV set or listen to a radio station at the moment. You're making many appearances, working, I imagine, tirelessly in the cause of what you do. But do you feel you can achieve very much in terms of what's happening back in the home country? Can you really make a difference sitting here in London?
It's a great question, not to me only, but to all my staff and people who are working with us, your foreign affairs, your militaries. We believe that we can make a difference by telling your people why we are fighting for our existence and getting the support we're having. Probably we're achieving something.
Mr. Ambassador, we appreciate you coming again. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for today. You've been with me, Colin Brazier. You're looking at pictures there. If you are watching on TV rather than listening on radio from Ukraine, keep an eye on those weather bulletins. There's one coming up soon. Storm Eunice threatening 100-mile-per-hour winds for the southwest of England and Wales. The train services tomorrow have already been cancelled. All the schools in Bristol have been closed. Keep your eye on the forecast.
Hello. The Met Office have issued a rare red warning because Storm Eunice arrives overnight and brings the risk of dangerous winds in places, especially parts of South Wales and southwest England. Ahead of Eunice, relatively calm this evening with clearing skies, showers easing and the winds dropping away for some time. So if you're heading to bed thinking it's quite calm out there, well, unfortunately, the winds really ramp up by around midnight or shortly after. Bands of rain sweep through very quickly, turning to snow over northern hills.